It was like a fight week of hell, just like always. It's what I knew. It don't feel right if it's not happening.
You won, had some of the biggest moments of your career in Las Vegas, and now final fight on the UFC contract at T-Mobile. Does it feel right?
Yeah.
Fans who once roared for Nate Diaz's fearless heart and street-born toughness were left confused as his career seemed to unravel at 40. The warrior who stunned the world by submitting Conor McGregor at UFC 196, who turned every press conference into chaos and who walked into the octagon without fear, suddenly grew quiet. Fewer fights, fewer headlines, more questions. Injuries piled up, rivals grew younger, and the spotlight shifted. Did time finally catch him, or is this only the calm before one last fight? Nate Diaz's tragic disappearance. For years, Nate had built his identity on always showing up. When other fighters backed out, he stepped in. When others stayed quiet, he spoke his mind. He made a name for himself by being fearless, raw, and completely honest. But now, when fans looked for him, he wasn't there. It felt strange. It felt wrong. The fighters from his era were moving on. Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal, and the Pettis brothers were either retired, slowing down, or beginning new chapters in life. Some were coaching. Some were building businesses. Some were simply enjoying life after years of war in the cage. But Nate seemed stuck in the middle. Not fully gone, but not truly present either. He was in limbo. At first, fans tried to stay hopeful. Maybe he was waiting for the right fight. Maybe he was planning something huge. Maybe he was training quietly to shock the world again. People told themselves the fire inside him was still burning. But as the months passed, hope became harder to hold on to. When Nate did appear in public, he looked different. Tired, older. The cuts and scars that once made him look fierce and legendary now made him seem worn out. Before, those marks had been symbols of battles won and wars survived. Now they felt like reminders of all the punishment his body had taken. The sharp intensity in his eyes seemed faded. Instead of hunger, there was distance. Instead of building momentum, Nate Diaz quietly started to collapse. There were no fight camps, no coaches in his corner, no signed contracts. Only silence, and that silence was heavy. This was a man who had once been one of the loudest and most fearless voices in MMA. Now, he was quiet, painfully quiet. Meanwhile, the world of MMA never stopped moving. While Nate sat on the sidelines dealing with a lawsuit and personal struggles, the sport kept pushing forward. New fighters rose through the rankings. New champions grabbed the spotlight. Some even copied his style of trash talk, trying to be raw and real like him. But many fans noticed something missing. They had the words, but not the authenticity. They had the attitude, but not the soul. The UFC began focusing more on new faces, clean-cut stars, social media influencers, and crossover fighters who drew in fresh audiences. The sport started looking more like a business machine than a battlefield. For older fans who loved grit, blood, and brutal honesty, it felt uncomfortable. It felt like the heart of the sport was slowly fading. The harsh truth was simple. MMA, especially the UFC, no longer seemed to need Nate Diaz. At least, that was how it looked from the outside. The man who had headlined some of the biggest pay-per-views and who forced Conor McGregor to tap out at UFC 196 was now seen as difficult, risky, and a problem. Nate never wanted to follow rules that didn't make sense to him. He wanted to fight on his own terms. He wanted to say what he felt. He did not want to play politics or smile for cameras. But the sport had changed. It was now driven by sponsors, executives in suits, and social media numbers. In that world, a man like Nate Diaz was dangerous in a way promoters did not like. The UFC never said they were done with him. There was no big announcement. But the signs were clear. His name was rarely mentioned on broadcasts. He was not seen at major events. Even his classic fights, including his first war with McGregor, faded as new stars and new highlights took the spotlight. Meanwhile, other fighters from his era adapted. Dustin Poirier stayed active and kept his name in the news. Justin Gaethje kept fighting and growing his reputation. Even Conor McGregor stayed in the headlines, promoting himself, coaching, and expanding his brand outside the cage. They found ways to stay visible. However, Nate disappeared back into Stockton every now and then. But how did he get into the spotlight? Was his journey to the top a pleasure ride? Let's find out. Diaz's legendary UFC 196 upset. UFC 196 on March 5, 2016, became one of the most unforgettable nights in combat sports history. It was the night that changed Nate Diaz forever. What makes the story even more powerful is that it was never supposed to happen. Diaz was not scheduled to fight. He was not preparing for a main event. He was simply another talented contender waiting for his opportunity. Then, with only 11 days' notice, everything shifted. Diaz agreed to step in and fight Conor McGregor, who at that time was the biggest star in mixed martial arts. McGregor was undefeated in the UFC, confident, flashy, and surrounded by massive hype. He had knocked out top opponents with ease and was seen as unstoppable. He was the company's golden attraction, the face of the sport. Almost everyone believed this would be another quick victory for him. Diaz, on the other hand, was viewed as a replacement fighter. He was the underdog in every sense. The odds were against him. He had less time to prepare. Many fans and analysts predicted he would be overwhelmed. But Diaz brought something that statistics cannot measure: experience, toughness, and absolute belief in himself. When the fight began, McGregor looked sharp and dangerous, landing powerful punches early. Diaz absorbed the shots and stayed calm. He did not panic. He did not break. Instead, he kept moving forward, talking, taunting, and forcing exchanges. As the rounds went on, McGregor began to slow down. Diaz's endurance and pressure started to make a difference. Then came the moment that shocked the world. Diaz rocked McGregor with clean punches, forcing him to retreat. He quickly took the fight to the ground and locked in a rear naked choke. Within seconds, McGregor tapped out. The arena exploded. Millions watching around the world were stunned. The sport's biggest star had just been defeated by a man who took the fight on short notice. After the fight, Diaz grabbed the microphone and calmly said, "I'm not surprised." Those words became legendary. In that instant, he was no longer just a fighter. He was a symbol of belief and authenticity. There was no polished image behind him, no carefully scripted personality. He was raw, real, and unapologetic. Fans connected deeply with that honesty. A rematch followed later that year at UFC 202 on August 20th, 2016. This time, both fighters had full training camps. The fight was intense, competitive, and closely contested over 5 brutal rounds. McGregor won by a narrow decision, but the loss did little to damage Diaz's growing legend. The world already knew who he was. He had proven that he could stand toe-to-toe with the sport's biggest name. Over the years, Diaz built a career that did not rely on championship belts. He never held a UFC title, yet he became one of the organization's biggest draws. Fans did not tune in to see him chase gold. They tuned in because whenever Diaz fought, something dramatic happened. Every fight felt unpredictable. Every appearance carried tension. He faced tough opponents like Michael Johnson, Gray Maynard, Donald Cerrone, Jim Miller, and Jorge Masvidal. These were not easy matchups. Many of them were brutal wars that left visible damage. Diaz absorbed punishment but kept moving forward. Cuts, swelling, and blood became part of his image. He was never carefully protected or handed easy fights. Behind the scenes, tensions began to grow between Diaz and the UFC. He wanted fair pay, respect, and meaningful opportunities. The organization, led by Dana White, had business priorities that did not always align with his demands. Diaz began turning down fights that did not interest him. He took long breaks from competition. Some fans felt frustrated, but to Diaz, it was about principle. He refused to be used or rushed. On August 17, 2019, he returned at UFC 241 to face Anthony Pettis. The arena erupted the moment he walked out. The energy felt similar to March 5, 2016. Diaz fought with sharpness and confidence, earning a clear victory and reminding everyone why he mattered. However, Nate Diaz's legacy was built on grit, authenticity, and unforgettable moments inside the cage. But when did he last step in to face an opponent? Was his final appearance another victorious chapter in his story, or did it end differently? Let's take a closer look and uncover what really happened. Diaz UFC Farewell Fight. In September 2022, Nate Diaz stepped back into the UFC octagon, and no one truly realized it might be the last time fans would see him fight there, at least for a while. Across from him stood Tony Ferguson, a veteran known for his strange, unpredictable style and non-stop pressure. Both men had spent decades in brutal battles. Their bodies carried the proof: old scars, stiff joints, faded bruises, and the silent damage that only fighters understand. Even before the first punch was thrown, their history was written across their skin. When the fight began, it unfolded like a story meant for the history books. For 4 intense rounds, the two veterans tested each other. They traded punches, battled for position, and moved with the experience of men who had seen everything inside the cage. The crowd could feel it. This was not just another fight. It was two warriors refusing to break. Then, in round 4, Nate found his moment. With perfect timing, he wrapped his arm around Ferguson's neck and locked in a tight guillotine choke. It was fast and precise. Ferguson had no choice but to tap. The arena exploded. The cage shook with cheers. Fans who had followed Nate for years jumped to their feet. It was a rare and beautiful sight in combat sports. A fighter walking away with a win, leaving on his own terms. Nate stood tall, calm, and proud, his face showing that same defiant confidence that had defined his entire career. Instead of celebrating loudly, planning his next move, or signing another deal, Nate simply disappeared from the UFC spotlight. He did not sign a new contract. He did not officially retire. He gave no long goodbye speech. The man who once argued openly with UFC President Dana White, who challenged the system and spoke his mind without fear, walked away in silence. The quiet that followed felt almost louder than his fights. Then, in mid-2023, rumors began to spread. Nate was planning something unexpected. He would step away from mixed martial arts and enter a boxing ring. A different sport, different rules, different rhythms, different dangers. And his opponent would not be another MMA veteran. It would be Jake Paul, a YouTube star turned professional boxer, known as much for headlines and controversy as for his punches. The announcement split fans into two sides. Some believed it was a smart money move. Boxing offered quick, massive paydays without long-term contracts. Others feared it would hurt Nate's legacy. He had built his name on toughness, skill, and endless stamina inside the octagon. Debates exploded online, in gyms, and on sports shows. On August 6, 2023, the fight finally happened. When Nate walked into the ring, something felt different. The crowd noticed it almost immediately. His movements seemed slower. His reactions were just a little late. The sharp rhythm that once overwhelmed opponents was not as smooth as before. He threw punches. He slipped shots. He kept moving forward. But the legendary cardio that fans once praised did not look the same. Round after round, he tried to push through. He always had. That was who he was. A fighter who refused to quit. But boxing is not MMA. The pace is different. The stance is different. The timing is different. Jake Paul's focused training and pure boxing preparation began to show. When the final bell rang, the result was clear. It was not a brutal knockout. It was not a devastating collapse. But Nate lost the decision. And at that moment, many people felt something shift. He was no longer the same unstoppable force who once shook the UFC lightweight division. He was no longer the fighter who terrified opponents with endless pressure and iron lungs. After the fight, many assumed this was the end. Analysts said his time at the top was over. Critics claimed the rebellion, the chaos, and the legendary run had finally faded. But will he ever step back into the ring again? Does he still have that same power and fire left inside him? Let's find out. Nate's shocking UFC comeback. In July 2024, Nate Diaz stepped back into the ring to face Jorge Masvidal in a long-awaited grudge match that fans had been begging to see for years. It felt like unfinished business finally coming to an end. Their rivalry stretched back to their violent clash under the bright lights of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, where the tension between them was not fake hype. It was real, bitter, and personal. This time, there were no championship belts at stake. There was no gold to win. There was only pride, legacy, and revenge. The fight itself was exhausting and brutal. Nate threw more than 700 punches, pushing a relentless pace the way he always had throughout his career. He pressured Masvidal constantly, stayed inches from his face, and showed flashes of that stubborn fire that once made him one of the most feared and respected fighters in combat sports. Round after round, both men absorbed punishment. After 10 hard rounds, the judges awarded Nate a majority decision. It was officially a win, but only just. The fight was close, gritty, and far from dominant. On paper, that victory should have meant everything. He had defeated an old rival. He had proven he could still survive a war. He had shown he could go a full 10 rounds without breaking. But something felt different. The crowd roared, yet the sound did not carry the same energy as before. The win did not move him toward a title fight. There was no championship opportunity waiting. No young contender stepped forward to challenge him. Instead of climbing toward the future, it felt like he was settling unfinished business from the past. Behind the raised hand and the headlines was a harder truth. Nate was not fighting the next generation of rising champions. He was fighting memories. He was battling ghosts from an era when his name alone could shake arenas and sell out massive events. The sport had moved forward. New stars had taken the spotlight. And while Nate still had heart and toughness, the center of attention was no longer fixed on him the way it once was. Then the situation became even more complicated. After the fight, instead of celebration, there was conflict. Nate filed a lawsuit against Fanmio, the boxing promotion company that organized the Masvidal event. He claimed he was owed $10 million, but had only received a portion of that amount. According to court filings, the full payment he was promised never arrived. The money that did come was reportedly sent in slow and uneven installments. For a fighter who had walked away from the Ultimate Fighting Championship to gain independence, this was a heavy blow. When Nate left the organization, it was not only about money, it was about control. He wanted to choose his own fights. He wanted freedom from long contracts that limited his options. He wanted to prove he could succeed on his own terms. That was the entire purpose of stepping away. But instead of freedom and stability, he found himself tied up in a legal battle. Reports about the event painted a messy picture behind the scenes. There were alleged problems with promotion, travel arrangements, payment delays, and overall organization. His team reportedly grew frustrated as confusion surrounded what should have been a smooth return. What was meant to be a triumphant comeback slowly turned into a stressful dispute. For Nate, this was not just business paperwork. It felt personal. He fought for respect. He pushed back against what he believed was unfair treatment. Nate Diaz, once the rebel who shook the system and stunned the world by submitting Conor McGregor, stood at a strange crossroads. But does he ever call out opponents? If he does, how did it go? Let's take a closer look. Nate Diaz astonishing fight challenges. Nate Diaz threw down challenges that could have shaken the entire fight world. He called out Max Holloway for the BMF belt, a fight that would have exploded across MMA like wildfire. He teased the idea of a third showdown with Conor McGregor, fully aware that their past clashes still burn in fans' memories. He even hinted at stepping into a boxing ring to go head-to-head with legends like Canelo Alvarez or Terence Crawford, two of the biggest names in the sport. These weren't just ordinary matchups. These were colossal, almost unimaginable battles. The kind that make you pause and think, he actually wants to do that? Some fans loved every word. They roared, "That's Nate!" never backing down. Others shook their heads, calling it overreaching, unrealistic, even reckless. But whether people cheered or doubted him, everyone listened. Because when Nate Diaz speaks, The fight world listens. That's the power he's always carried. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, the words hit hard. Yet this time, there was a subtle difference. Every bold call came with conditions. He wouldn't step back unless the opponent was worthy. The contract had to be perfect. The money had to feel right. The title had to matter. The moment had to feel monumental. Fighting wasn't just fighting anymore. It had become a delicate balance of timing, opportunity, and respect. And so far, nothing had met every demand. No opponent was exactly right. No offer had all the pieces in place. No moment felt big enough to lure him back into the chaos. Beneath the tough talk, fans started noticing something new: hesitation. At first, it was tiny, a pause, a flicker of doubt, a crack in the armor. Nate Diaz built his reputation on being fearless. He was the guy who accepted fights on short notice, the one who didn't care about rankings, odds, or expectations. The man who walked into storms smiling. But now, with months sliding by without action, that pause grew longer. So what are your thoughts on Nate Diaz's tragic downfall? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.